Good evening. Thanks for coming in. My name is Hilary Harper. I'm the presenter of the Saturday morning program at 774 ABC Melbourne, and I also do some producing there for John Fane's Conversation Hour from time to time. And we're here to talk about anger tonight. So thanks for joining in that. You'll get a chance to ask what I'm sure will be really interesting questions a bit later. My own experience of anger. I was trying to think today what would distill that, and it was when I lived in a shared house, I would sometimes feel the rage of youth, and I would go out into the backyard with a jam jar, and I would go into the alley and I would smash it on the cobblestones, and then I would come back in and get the brush and shovel and go and sweep it up in case, kids or dogs cut their feet on it. So that's my truly authentic relationship to the emotion of anger, and hopefully we can get something better out of our guest tonight. With us we have Brendan Cowell, who is a writer, an actor, a playwright, a screenwriter, a director, and he's just written a novel called How It Feels, which coincidentally is for sale on the table up at the back. So please welcome Brendan Cowell.
Thank you.
In the middle we have Karen Pickering. She is, she runs a kind of newsy salon almost in a pub called Cherchez la Femme. She's a feminist pop culture commentator, I guess you could say, a social media consultant, and she was one of the organisers of Slut Walk. Please welcome Karen. And thirdly, Michael Currie. He's a psychologist. He specialises in helping teenage boys and their families in particular. But, it's adults, children, families, everybody benefits when you start looking at those kind of relationships. Please give Michael a good welcome. And Michael's book also, you might notice, up on the back table. It's called Doing Anger Differently, Helping Adolescent Boys. So I thought I might start today by asking Brendan a couple of questions about your book, Brendan, How It Feels. It's set in Cronulla, where you grew up, and it's got quite a few angry young men in it. What's going on there? What's driving that rage in them?
Oh, look, a number of things. Because I was wondering why I didn't get selected to do the happy talk tomorrow night. But I'm happy to be here anyway. Thanks all for coming. But yeah, I wanted to write a book about how it felt to be young before I lost all connection with it as years go by. And I just remembered everything at that time being so enormous and palpable, and that everything could change, and everything was always lurching towards something very dark and dangerous. And I guess a lot of us were angry back then. A lot of us still are. And I always wonder why we all had to get so smashed, and why we had to steal our parents' car and drive it really fast into the sand dunes, and why we had to, punch people in the head at the train station for no reason. And I mean, it came out of a whole lot of things. And I mean, we even got angry when we were happy. Like I really liked a girl, and so I told my mate, so we drove 40 kilometres out of town and just threw fucking rocks at this window until it smashed, and then drove back. Because that's how it felt, and you can't really explain it. And anger exists, and we have so much in us, and when you're that young, you're being asked to be so much. You're being asked to know who you are for the rest of your life, and you're being asked to understand women when you can hardly look at a Clio magazine without exploding, and then they're like, so do you want to be a dentist, a real estate agent, who are you? And have normal relationships, and are you a Christian? Like, what are you? And you don't fucking know, but you wanna know, and you have to pretend to know, because everyone's trying to pretend to know. And it makes you really angry. But I think, I lost a lot of friends in Cronulla, which my book kind of gets to eventually, and I guess that's why I wrote the book, as to why these beautiful young men, I'm sure Michael will have a lot to say about this, and I can't wait to hear it, why these beautiful young men aren't here now. And why they didn't make it out of their youth.
Because there seems to be a lot, as you say, of trying to mask those powerful emotions. There's drugs, there's sex, there's driving fast, there's fighting, sport, all those kinds of things. And a lot of people in the book take that final step to get away from perhaps their emotions, or perhaps that sense of feeling trapped.
Yeah, and that's a theatrical act of anger in itself, because suicide always has some kind of gesture. It happens in the parent's bed, or is it hanging in a public place, or it's at a beach, and I always thought there was something within that. And I just think anger exists. Anger, and I think in our culture, I think one of the worst parts of our culture is we don't want irregular emotions and behaviours to happen, so we ignore them. And I think it's time we celebrated anger, rage, confusion, disassociation, bewilderment, depression, all those things, and accepted them as if they were beautiful, especially in young people. And then maybe this bad shit wouldn't happen, And that's what I don't know. I wanted to find some answers by writing the book, and I think that's what I kind of came to, is that we have to acknowledge anger and let it be.
Well, let's go to Michael. Michael, how normal is anger? How do we deal with it as a normal part of everyday life, or is it always going to be disruptive and threatening?
Well, just building on what Brendan had to say, anger's abnormally normal, really, that it's something that always disturbs us and unsettles us. But with Brendan's idea that anger is something to be celebrated, there's a lot in that. The trick always is, though, that one of the definitions of anger is always that it's someone else's fault. It's not me that's at fault or to blame here. But for people who get angry a lot, over a period of time, it might be that the penny starts to drop. Actually, I'm really angry at fucking everybody. But it's amazing how long it takes people to get that. And part of the difficulty with anger is making the inner turn, which it sounds like that's something Brendan meant to do with his book. Rather than always looking for the problem out there, trying to make the inward turn. There's this beautiful poem that Anne Carson wrote about anger called Hot, and she talks about clambering along to find the source. What's the source of my anger? So all these things we feel, the physiological arousal, the thoughts going around about, the fundamental inference of anger that they've hurt me, so I have to hurt them. They're all very similar amongst all of us. We feel those things very similarly, but this idea of clambering towards the source, that's where, in trying to find the kernel of it, the truth of our anger, that's where we can find something that belongs to each one of us.
I want to talk a bit more as the hour progresses about how much control we've got over our anger, but let's start with what happens in our bodies and our brains when we're angry. What are these physiological responses, and can they be measured? Do scientists sit there and go, oh yeah, that's normal on the angerometer, or how much is too much anger?
By the way, I'm really glad I got asked to the angry night, by the way, because anger is so much more interesting emotion than happiness. I mean, I might come tomorrow night just so in hope I might get a good sleep. Because there's nothing more boring than happiness.
Well, you only need a couple of minutes, really, don't you?
In fact, let's deal with it now.
Yeah, exactly. It's like poets can't write when that happens. There's nothing really to say, is there? You just want to go back to your happy house with your happy people and continue with your happy fucking life.
Well, there's only something to write about when there's something wrong. What was your question, Hilary?
What happens to us when we're angry?
Look, yes, as I said, very similar things happen to us, and it can be observed, described, and even some psychologists who have that rigorous, dare I say, even obsessive bent, they like to measure anger. But that's not really anything that interests me so much, because we sort of know what angry people look like. They look sort of half mad, really, and that's enough, really. In fact, that's a definition of anger that Seneca, a Roman philosopher, put forward, that anger is a temporary madness. The thing that interests me is what anger does, really, when we get angry, and I think it has a few functions. One is that it serves a protective function. So when we fall in love with a girl, say the story that Brendan told, perhaps it's scary to fall in love with a girl when you're an adolescent, and it's a bit more protective to get really furious and angry at something and hurl a few rocks at the passing cars rather than actually wonder about this feeling of being close to someone, what that might mean. That's can be a very threatening, difficult situation for an adolescent to be in, often for the first time. So it has this protective function. And the other thing one of the other, I guess, ideas about anger that I've come across is this idea that anger is an assertion. So when someone tries to hurt us or tries to accuse us of something, it's as if we get to have this angry reaction because we think these people are representing us the wrong way. And anger can be seen as an assertion. And the assertion is, I am not wrong about myself. I am who I say I am. We feel anger, and in response to the anger, we try and do something back to try and assert, in fact, who we are.
So can anger be a positive method of self-definition? I am resisting this power that's acting on me that I don't agree with and that might not be fair.
It can be, but I think in the end it's a futile one, a necessary one, but a necessary futility that's involved in anger.
It's interesting to me that you were talking about that kind of rock throwing thing that happens apparently all around the world. I went to Peru and they said, yeah, you walk around the square in the evening and if a boy likes you, he throws little pebbles at you. It's like, oh, good. Universal culture. So what happens with girls? Do girls and boys do anger differently, or do we just get taught anger differently?
Well, I guess the stereotype is that boys, as we say in psychological jargon, externalise. They like to punch and hit and yell and scream, and that women don't do that. But I'm not sure that that's really the case, that women have lots of very sophisticated ways of expressing their anger through exclusion, through looking at the social milieu in different ways, and I've seen a few good old bitch fights in my time. I'm sure
exclusion's it though, isn't it? Because guys will just punch each other in the head or say it when we're after 10 beers, but girls will be like, I'm so not talking to her. You know, and they'll have fallings out. Like, I've never had a falling out with a mate, like inadvertently, but they have these kind of insinuated fallings out that it never really manifests.
That's one thing I found really interesting about the book, is that the two, Neil and his Neil, the protagonist, and one of his very good friends, Gordon, they danced this tango for decades of love and friendship and rage and outrage. And I, you know, maybe it's because I'm coming at it from a female perspective, I found it really hard to understand why they didn't just part ways.
Right. Well,
there'd be no book otherwise. Don't you get it?
It'd be a lot shorter.
Because then I'd be talking at the happy lecture, I think. Look, the reason I wanted to write a book was about the violence of violence in a male friendship. Like, these guys love each other so much, and they go through all this stuff, you know, the death of a parent and divorce and domestic violence and personal sadnesses and tragedies within friendship groups. And when you go through that much stuff with a guy knows you forever. And then one guy takes off and he decorates himself and he changes his hair and his voice and he accomplishes all these things and he comes back a changed person. And how do you come back and look at that guy and go, this is the new me, this person who's been to all these places and is now, you know, got so much more to hide, and that person just stares at you and goes, that's not you, I know who you are. You know, and how do you change in front of another man? Change is a really violent act, but they're the ties that bind us, you know, a connection between men, but we can't necessarily communicate it. You know, we can after we drink a lot, or we can through activities or in our own special ways. But there's a beautiful love between heterosexual men, you know, which is hard to communicate, and often it will manifest in anger, you know. And that's kind of what the book's about. But I think, you know, when a guy's angry, bad stuff happens when they don't feel like they can knock on their uncle's door, their dad's door, and go, Dad, I'm so angry, I'm so lost. I don't think I have any talents.
And there's a lot of absent fathers in this book, or disappointing fathers. Or
even fathers that are there, or uncles that are there, but they're not there. And all those kind of things, I think, are a part of it. Not that I'm blaming anyone, but it's, you know, we need to be able to be strong on the football field, but also cry at the ballet, and we need to be able to admit that to those around us, to our role models, you know.
I want to have a chat to you, Karen, because you were one of the co-organisers of Slut Walk. We're having a little chat before we came out about what kind of responses you got. Tell us a bit about what happened when you went into this public arena with this idea for Slut Walk, and you may have to just quickly explain what Slut Walk was.
Sure. You're probably not wondering why I'm on the angry panel. Because I'm a feminist.
We're dating.
I was one of the organisers of Slut Walk in Melbourne, and it came about because it's a worldwide movement to push back on the idea of women being responsible for sexual assaults committed against them. And so it began in Canada. A police officer in Toronto was speaking to a group of university students, and he said that if women wanted to reduce the risk of being raped, they should stop dressing as sluts. So obviously it didn't take long for that to get a bit of traction in Toronto, and the feminists on the ground there organised a protest swiftly, and they named it Slut Walk, which since we organised the Melbourne one, we've been in contact with Toronto a fair bit, and they've been really open about the decision to call it that and how important it was to get media coverage and also to take the very word that had been so offensive and kind of take it back and throw it back in the faces of people who would use it to denigrate women. So Slut Walk Melbourne was one of the first slut walks outside Toronto. It was before New York, London, Paris, and it's also one of the biggest turnouts of any slut walk around the world. So obviously we kind of were able to tap into a vein of anger that women and men were feeling about so much in public life with regard to the way women are spoken about and the way women are treated. So
it was interesting too because it was hugely controversial online, and there were many different, very, very different forums in which it was discussed, and then it kind of leaked out into the mainstream media as well and got some coverage there, and the whole concept was hugely controversial. Sure. Tell us about some of the ways people interacted with it online, for starters.
Well, the online space, if for anyone who is there often, can be fairly high octane. And when you're talking about an issue like sexual assault, and so, you know, we had behind the scenes organising Slut Walk, we had a lot of contact with the police about hate mail and vague threats of violence against the organisers of Slut Walk, and against also quite horrifically against people who use the Slut Walk message as an opportunity to share their experiences of survival online. So yeah, it definitely unleashed a torrent of anger and probably a fairly latent, you know, hatred of women, as in the people who were writing, you know, well, if you guys dress as sluts, I hope something happens to you, were clearly pretty messed up people to start with, and I don't think that this was necessarily what made them like that. So yeah, so we had a lot of clashes online, but the other thing that was incredible was that the anger, and I was going to say this before about how does anger feel when we experience it physiologically. You know, sometimes it feels really good, and it can be a bit addictive because it's kind of a rush and a thrill, and there are some things you should get angry about. I think if you look around at our kind of political landscape and you're not angry at the moment, then you're not really paying attention, you know. So there are some things that's completely legitimate to get angry about, and it can be a great motivator and a great fuel and an incentive to get going and make things less shit, you know.
And is that partly about being angry with other people? Because if you're collectively angry, you've got a lot of power, whereas if you're individually railing against things, it's quite a different experience.
Yeah, and the amazing thing was that, you know, I don't know how many people here came to Slut Walk in Melbourne, but it was not an angry day. There was no sense of, you know, being on the barricades and people, you know, fist shaking and screaming and yelling. It was an incredible show of solidarity with women who had survived assault. It was a gesture to them to say it's not your fault if you were attacked or assaulted by someone. The only person responsible is the perpetrator, and you know, no matter what you wear, you're never to blame for what happens to you. So there were families, there were a lot of babies and children. We had 4 generations of one family. Women who a woman who brought her mother and her grandmother and her daughter to Slut Walk. So it wasn't an angry day, but certainly it was a kind of, I think, a fairly constructive channeling of anger about something that is actually horrendous into a display of real, love in a way, at the risk of sounding a little bit kind of wishy-washy.
Yeah, the happy night.
I'll say that for tomorrow night. Yeah.
When are we talking about love, by the way?
We already put that out there. I want to ask you, Michael, because you work with families and you work with children and young men, is there a way to channel that anger that some of them are feeling into a constructive thing, or is it about working with it in a different way, trying to diminish it or managing it somehow? What do you do?
Well, with the sort of, my experience has been working mainly with angry adolescents and despairing parents bringing their angry adolescents to me, and they wheel them in and say, okay, fix my son, daughter, please. I'll be back in 45 minutes. How much will that be? And before they get out the door, I get my shepherd's crook and say, just come back in here, Mum and Dad. We need to have a talk about this first. So often there's this sense that parents just need to wheel their children in, and I can give them a dose of anger management, just like you can give out medication.
Well, I was wondering, because some people get given anger management courses as part of their, appearance before the courts, and they go for a day or a week. Is that going to work?
Sure. Well, anger management is a fine thing. It's very popular. It's been shown to help people manage their anger. It does just that. It stops people getting so intensely angry. It stops them getting angry so much. It stops them acting destructively in the moment of being angry. But what it doesn't do is what I was gesturing to before, this idea about clambering along to find the source of the anger. What is the kernel of truth that your anger grows from? Anger management doesn't do that. When
you do that, does it help lower the levels of intensity in a relationship? Bad intensity, I should say.
I'm saying because you said I do that. Well, do I do that? I don't think you can make an angry person look at themselves.
Oh, no, I mean, if that process happens, if someone does track towards the source, what happens in the relationship? Does that mean that there's less anger presenting all the time, or
it could mean, fuck it, this is shit house, I'm out of here. It could mean that. It could mean just the opposite. Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Or it could mean simply that. There was a girl I was talking with yesterday. It could mean something to do with being able to take an appropriate distance from your parent. That if the mother always fails, then perhaps what the adolescent has to do is take a bit of a distance and realise that there's a wished-for mother that you wish for, but actually is never realised in the flesh and blood person in front of you. And you have to create a distance between those two things. Help the young person see that.
What about relationships, romantic relationships, interpersonal relationships between men and women or whatever genders? Are they more kind of vulnerable to anger than other friendships? Are they charged with anger?
Well, the saying goes, isn't it, that we're the meanest and nastiest to those people who we love the most. And perhaps that's because if we take what I was saying before about other people representing us, having a certain version of us, the people who represent us in the most important manner are the people who love us and who we love too. And so when something comes back from them that we find objectionable or an insult, then it instills a rage in us. The difficulty is often in couples who have that style of angry interaction, there's always another blaming, and which can be quite difficult to shift, especially if they've been doing that for a long, long time. And particularly, as sort of Brendan and Karen have gestured to, there's an enjoyable part of anger. There's nothing better than having a good screaming match for some people. Me, it doesn't do it for me, but it does it for other people. They love to scream and fight and yell.
I'm just thinking, I love getting angry with people at something else, like sitting around a table with, maybe a few drinks and going, and another thing, and then this happened, and banging the table is really satisfying. It's like a kind of consciousness raising that and Cherchez la Femme every month is kind of this, feminists getting together in a pub and going, what's rubbish? This is rubbish. And it's
like,
healing.
I hate those dinner parties where everyone's angry at the same thing. It's like, It's like that panel show, the panel that used to be on. They'd all just sit around and agree angrily about the same thing. Like, what a waste of a fucking hour, you know? Like, why don't you have some people who are vehemently not going to disagree with each other, but accept the wonderfulness of each other's opinions and then rip right in, you know? Or maybe that's sport. I don't know.
Well, I was interested in
the
your
dynamic
book.
Is imperative, I think.
In your book, there's quite a few instances where the young men or the young people get together and are angry or violent or repelling towards an outside force. So there's the other gangs with the baseball bats full of nails, or outsiders in some form. And maybe that's what Karen is thinking about too, where a group of you band together and get angry at other people.
But the problem perhaps...
We fight with each other, but it's sort of in love, you know. There's a kind of feeling that if you're all in the one place and you all have a general agreement about something, then you can really go to town on each other and like the way a family dinner or a Christmas day can sometimes be a pretty intense experience, because you kind of feel like, well, all bets are off, you know. I can say whatever I want to these people, they're stuck with me and I'm stuck with them, and I don't know, maybe it's just my family, but you know, there's a kind of
no, it's not just your family, Karen.
There's a kind of satisfaction in that, in kind of being yourself sometimes, and not censoring what you're saying, and not being so careful to be PC, and, you know, make sure you're always treading on,
and that's some families' communication style, that they like to get out and have a rip-roaring argument, and that's how things are settled. It's only through being angry and people having a really good go at each other that the issues come out, and like, oh, I didn't know you felt that. And it's that's where I guess this other aspect of anger, it can motivate particularly young people and adolescents to say things they wouldn't dare say otherwise. Normally it's
So it can be
but then when they're angry, they say things, and one of my messages to parents in my book is that even though he's saying it angrily or she's saying it angrily, listen, and don't necessarily keep the argument going, but come back at another time and say, listen, when we were arguing you said, I didn't know you felt that way. Can we talk about it?
That's something that cropped up for me in your book too, Brendan, is that there's this constant kind of battle to try and express things somehow, and people really struggle in the book with expressing it verbally. Yeah. And I love how Neil, the main character, he tries to go away. He does theatre. He's quite good at it. He's successful overseas. Yeah. He writes plays. He directs plays. He's trying to express stuff in all these different modes. But, you know, he comes back to town and still feels caught up in the kind of maybe the machismo or the culture there, and he still feels trapped. What's going on there? Yeah,
well, I think I'm from Cronulla. I don't know how you guys are clearly from Melbourne. I don't know how many of you know Cronulla. Probably just heard about it. Heard about it in the news. They have the worst football team in the history of the world, and but it's quite a beautiful place. But Cronulla got to 1972 and went, "This is a good year. Let's just stay here." You know what I mean? And like, so everything's just like the food, the fashions, the whole vibe is 72, and it's 97% white Caucasian Christian, and has beautiful manicured lawns and beautiful family values. And some of my friends, my nan still lives there, my football team who suck, and I love going down there. But I found I had to get out I had something in me, and that was starting to become anger. So I had to get out because I was going to explode there, because I just felt like I had a personality. I had all these colours in me that no one would accept. And clearly Cronulla showed a really bad sign of itself, I think, in December 2005 with the riots. And it's at the end of the train line, and little by little I watched, the Vietnamese move in, and there'd be a punch up on the Oval, then one of the Vietnamese guys is going out with your sister 6 months later, and he's over at your birthday party. And that happened with Fijians, and then Samoans, Chinese, and they pop, the Italians would pop their soccer balls, they kick our footballs over, and then little by little they're at your birthday party. But when the Lebanese situation came, which was when I was out of there, it's so complex that a really, really horrible thing happened. And I don't know, it makes me angry, the place, but it does feel like home, and that's what the book kind of talks about. And I guess xenophobia is a word that's used a lot in our culture, and And I don't know, I remember I was walking down there recently with, I had it might have been pink, but it was a scarf. And I just walked past a group of young guys and they all just went, scarf. And I thought, are you naming the item of clothing that I'm wearing? Or are you perceptive? Like, what is... But it was just because it was a fucking scarf and they don't accept scarves, so they just went fucking scarf. And I went, pants. Hair. Male. I know that's a ridiculous kind of notion of what it is, but yeah, there were surfies, there was bombers. I was the arty raver guy, and you had to, and being angry at the others gave you a personality, which I think we were heading towards before. If you are angry in a confused time, especially when you're young, suddenly you are someone. And you come alive. And so hating the nips hating the wogs, and the wogs hating the surfies, and then we'd have a fight after the underrated disco and smash long necks over each other's heads and go, we exist, we have a personality. And now looking back at it now, it's going, what were we thinking? What a waste of time. And
Brendan, wouldn't you say, though, that it's a matter of how you use your anger? Like, you were full of all of these colours. And if you use your anger and say, like a lot of the boys who I've worked with, they join a youth gang and the leader of the gang's the most ruthless, the violent character, that's not something that produces colour. That just produces this drab blackness of might and ruthlessness is right. But there's another way to use anger, which brings alive the colours, and perhaps the question is not of anger and whether it exists or not, but how it's used.
It's the arts. But I felt so ridiculous because that was my brand of, and what is that? And you go back and people have real lives and they do real stuff, like build houses, and I feel like a flamboyant fool, but I think I'm better than them, and there's this whole kind of clash,
Everyone hates the arty, tie-eyed, polyamorous wanker.
Yeah.
It's like that's
but I'm angry and I'm still... But there comes a time where you have to stop being angry, or you have to use your anger for good, not evil. And when you're young, I wrote angry plays, lots of satire, and I had no respect for character and people. And if you want to turn into a writer and a proper human being and have relationships, that are kind of, human, and the police aren't called, then, you...
Go on, how do you do that? Go on, keep going.
You have to look in at the anger first, because people who look this way their whole time, and they're going to stay angry, and you've got to do something with it, and you've got to move the fuck on and become an adult, or bad stuff happens.
Well, there's a key sentence in the book. You talk about Neil's in a fight just after he's alienated his girlfriend and his best friend and realised he's going to have to leave the town to fulfil these artistic expectations, and he said no one here had anything to do but harm what they didn't understand. And Michael, I wanted to ask you that it's kind of a truism that we're angry and hate things that we fear. Is that what goes on in people's heads when you as a psychologist you pick through the layers?
You're asking if we're angry about things that we're afraid of? Yeah,
fear, anger, hatred, are they all linked?
Well, in the end, I think what anger is, particularly when it leads to aggression and fist fighting, that the fear is the angry response is a defence, if you like, against the fear of disintegration. So, to take the example of Alan, who was a boy who I worked with, that I wrote about in my book, he, in the schoolyard, gets teased about his sexual preferences. He gets called a pufta by all his friends, and he can't stand the fact that he's called that. And he can't find the means to respond in words. And so what he does is he lays into his friends, not in a really a fair way, but he gets out this metal ruler with a really sharp edge on it and starts hacking into their necks, and he causes them quite severe injuries. They have to go to hospital, and he gets suspended from school, is on the verge of expulsion. Enter Michael Currie, who's supposed to save him from expulsion from school, but this is the point where I saw him. But at that moment, it looks like this boy is just needlessly, senselessly aggressive, but in talking to Aidan, he said he felt what he had to do was do something to get back at these boys, because, these are not his words, I'm summarising now, he felt like he was going to fall apart. And the only way he could try and keep himself together was to hit out at them and to destroy and harm them in some way. And so that's where I say this idea of angry aggression is an existential act. It's an act where we're trying to keep ourselves together.
So is that something that parents can start to manage quite early on? Because, you hear parents saying to their toddlers, don't throw a tantrum, use your words, please, It's that attempt to verbalise things that are hugely powerful for a small child, those emotions. Is that going to help a child later on when it gets to situations like that? Yeah,
if you can help a child use words, of course. Like in that moment that Brendan talked about where it's almost, well, it comes back to that definition of Seneca, anger is a temporary madness. The madness is where we're so enraged, our thoughts are so full of thoughts of attack, and we're so aroused that we are mad, and the metaphorical capacity of language to represent things for us has failed us, and so we want to hit someone or attack someone. But if in that moment we can use words, that's going to be a lot more productive outcome than someone, there's certainly the boys I work with, going out and slogging it out with someone.
But Seneca did write a play where a guy ate his own children's heads, though, so, he was particularly angry.
well, obviously, people who write about anger are implicated in it some way, of course. Yeah. Yes.
Karen, can I ask you about the Cherche La Femme sessions that you run in the pub? What's that like as, a rather large verbalisation session, which I understand often involves men and women in the audience?
Yeah, there are male feminists. It's usually about 50-50, actually, men and women who come to the pub, and it's kind of based on the old politics in the pub model. And it's, we have a few drinks, and there's a nominal topic for the month, and then I put together a panel much like this, and we just rove over pop culture and current affairs around that topic. So it's a bit of a release valve. Once a month you have a few drinks and be among friends and discuss things that you found appallingly sexist, or just learn about things that you never knew before. So the last Cherche La Femme was on Feminism and Radio. The one before that was on Feminism and Fat, and that was an incredible session where we had fat acceptance activists come and talk to a group of people who had never even heard of this idea before. So in a way, it's kind of everything that I try and do is usually a kind of feminism by stealth, in a way, where you trick people into thinking they're just having a few drinks and hanging out with their friends, and actually there's a bit of sneaky consciousness raising going on. So we've had some stormers, though. We've had some really, really angry, explosive discussions. One memorable one about prostitution, which I'm still having nightmares about. But you have a kind of usually it's light, and usually it's done in good humour and done in a way that's about sharing experiences. So when you leave after that hour or so on a Tuesday night, you think, I'm not going crazy. There are people like me. And it's okay, And you did a session on sport at one point. I was interested in that because often you feel like the anger and aggression are things that are encouraged in sport in some ways. It's part of the drive to achieve and to be part of a successful team. How does that go when you splice it in with feminism and maybe look at women sports people? Well, we actually spoke mostly about male sports people on that night, because there happened to be a case in the news of a male athlete hurting a woman. It was such a coincidence. Of course there was. And so people wanted to talk about that. So we actually ended up... and I love sport. I'm actually a sport tragic, and so it was a good kind of safe space for people to talk about their frustration, say at AFL culture or whatever the football culture was that seems to license these acts of aggression off the field as well. So I was thinking about what Michael was saying before about, and a lot of the discussion has been around how boys and men express their anger, and boys becoming men struggling with that. And I think that it is really gendered in lots of ways, the way that anger is seen in our society, that often really unacceptable displays of aggression on the part of men are kind of explained away as boys will be boys, or he had testosterone going mad as if he's kind of a slave to his hormones, which is really offensive to men, I think. But often an act of of aggression from a woman is explained away as well and dismissed as hysterical, ranting, nagging, whinging, whatever. So there's ways to be angry and there's ways to be angry, and I think that sometimes men are told it's okay to be angry because it's a male trait to show aggression, and I think women are often told it's not okay because no one wants to hear it. So,
well, let's go from sport to the arts. We've got a couple more minutes left to chat before we take questions. But Brendan, you played Hamlet at one point. He had issues. And I'm wondering what it's like when you're putting together and rehearsing a production like that, when you've got to be on stage being angry. What's it like for you and for the cast to immerse yourself in someone who's really, really angry?
Tell us what it's like for the cast first.
Things are a bit catatonic.
Look, it was like 8 months of my life that I can't even really think about. And it just disappeared. I didn't talk to my girlfriend at the time. I went to work and then I came home and watched Fox Sports News till 4 a.m. and ate yogurt and then woke up and had lunch and went back to bed and then went to the show and I was just there. And then afterwards I moved to New York and I was really sad. I was just eating and drinking a lot and I didn't want to work. And then I came home and I saw my doctor and he said, go and see a psychologist. And I went and saw a psychologist. He said, you've got post-Hamlet depression. And he said, you achieved what you always wanted to achieve and now you think the world is meaningless. And I thought, fuck, man, you're really good at your job. And I did a soliloquy and left,
Well, Brendan, did you say it's madness, but there's method in it?
Yeah, exactly. No, he was right. I gave everything I had, whatever it turned out to be on stage, I gave everything I had. And this is a kid, I mean, getting back to what you were talking about before, distancing, and it's so important when something happens in a family that everyone listens to how the youth, I mean, I thought a lot about Prince William and Harry, love Harry, and I love Pippa, heaps. But I worried, like when Di died, who talked to them? And I thought these boys walking through these giant cold hallways and these old men coming, come on, we'll go and shoot some ducks, or let's play chess and have some brandy. I mean, who was the friends allowed in? And like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern is sent in by Gertrude and he's not even really close to them. He went to school with them years ago and that kind of turns out, ominously. And I thought, well, that's Hamlet, isn't it? His dad's gone, he's wandering through these cold hallways and then mum goes off with the uncle and dad's visiting him and it goes from this lost little boy to a guy that can kill people, and I guess that's what I'm talking about a lot in my book as well. And I went back to the third draft of my book after I played Hamlet and it was wildly helpful.
It sounds like it can be a bit scary growing up into a man and realising how much power you have to do damage if that anger gets out of control.
Yeah, and that's where empathy is the distance between a boy and a man. It's where you see that everything that you do affects the people around you and that your pain is a freckle on the pain of the universe. And once you realise that, you get a little less angry, I think.
Phew.
But perhaps there's something...
Does that make any sense? I don't know.
Just drawing on what your comments about Brendan's book about the loss of fathers and perhaps Hamlet as well, that perhaps there's a function of a father that's important here as well, this movement from a boy to a man, that it's a father who's able to set a limit, because a boy who's angry and aggressive and he has nothing... why not get angry? Why not get into a screaming match? Why not punch the hell out of anyone who offends them at all down the street? Because that's all he has, and that's where a father in building a vision about what a boy might want for his life, and then showing him, hey mate, these are the steps you need to take to get there. And it doesn't need to be a man to be a father. A woman can be a father, can do that as well.
Yeah, but Hamlet's so angry, he goes and makes a play. You know, it's like his dad's going, go and kill the guy. He's like, no, but I'll stage a pantomime. You know, it's hardly an act of dissidence. You know,
that's what you did.
I know exactly. It's pathetic. The pen's not mighty,
It depends with the force with which it's applied, right. I think we'll take some questions. What I'm going to do is let you fight it out with the people with the microphones, so put your hands up and try to attract their attention, and we'll take them as they come. You can direct them to any particular person or to the panel in general as you wish.
This is just a general question. I'm wondering, do all cultures have similar attitudes to anger, or does it vary from culture to culture?
Michael, perhaps?
Well, I don't know how I'm qualified to answer that question, but
the cultural minister for anger.
Well, thank you, and let me try to say nothing in a lot of words.
I've been to countries where people seem a lot angrier than here. Mm-hmm. You know, there's this, and by the same token, people come to Australia and say, "Wow, you guys are so cruisy here." You know, like you don't get angry, but yeah, you know.
But perhaps, I mean, just to talk about it in the Australian context, I mean, I have worked with lots of adolescents and families who've felt displaced and have lost a homeland and have that problem of being lost between nations. And perhaps what motivates a lot of people who've come to Australia is the loss of their homeland, and the absence of that, a sort of nostalgia. Whether they bring that anger with them as part of their culture, I don't know, because in the place that I work, I only work with people's culture insofar as they bring that into the room with them, and I'm listening to them, the person, not so much the culture they come to. Did you find the young people that came to Cronulla, Brendan, angry in different ways?
Yeah, I mean, well, young guys are angry in some way. I don't know. I mean, I go to India a lot, and there's 800 million people under the poverty line. They're all just sitting around with smiles on their face, having a chat and a chai, you know. And then I come back to the traffic in Darlinghurst, and everyone's in their car in their Saabs, and they try and fucking kill each other. I say, how does that all work out, you know? And I think they talk to each other in India. Family is everything. Not all. Like my teenagers, nephews, just looking at the screens all the time and blowing shit up, and they'll sit around and talk to each other. And in that study of anger that I read in the Good Weekend, maybe in 2008, possibly out of date now, but it said that the happiest people in the world were in the coldest climates because they spent the most time with each other inside. And I thought that was pretty interesting. You know, that through difficulty comes some kind of, you know, togetherness.
If you're forced to live in a small yurt or something,
yeah,
you need to get along.
And you've just got each other.
I was just thinking, a few years ago, Germaine Greer wrote an essay called On Rage. I don't know how many people read it, but it was about Indigenous Australia, and in a pretty ham-fisted way, with a few, you know, problems. She tried to make an argument about rage in Indigenous culture being a logical result of the way that Indigenous people have been treated by white Australians. And so that as a premise sounds fairly, you know, sensible, but the way she went about it was a bit mad. Can you imagine? And so, but yeah, there was this kind of attempt, at least on her part, to come to terms with a culture that she saw as being defined by suppressed rage, and to try and, you know, do a kind of post-colonial reading for why that was. So, I mean, I guess that there are some cultures that get given anger passed down through generations as a result of how they're treated. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yep, wave at a microphone. One up there. And for the other microphone, we've got one down here, I think.
Yeah. Hi. Yesterday I picked up my 3-year-old from childcare, and there were these articles about temper tantrums on the table. And I went home and read it, and I thought, oh my God, is my son having temper tantrums? And this morning I asked the teacher, is he having temper tantrums? She said, oh no, well maybe a little bit. But I think he picks it up from the other boys. And the class at the moment is quite heavily male. And so I've just been thinking, is there something in the idea that maybe if all the men go off and have their anger in one way and all the women go off and have their anger in another way, then maybe we could learn something from getting together and seeing how we both do anger differently? I don't know. What do you think?
Would we lose a crop of small boys?
So that was a comment, not a question, was it? Yeah. So I mean, I don't know if this answers the question, but there's a lot of evidence to show that everyone just getting together and blowing off their anger, that this idea that somehow gets rid of anger, and I think that's false. That just blowing off steam is helpful. It's this sort of cathartic method of curing anger. One of the things I've done in my work is work with boys using drums. These are boys who are very aggressive and don't talk too well. So at first we start with drumming groups. And lots of parents come to me and say, oh, it's really great how you're getting these boys together to blow out their anger by playing the drums. But that's actually not what's going on at all. It's a way of trying to help boys get together in a group. Again, a bit like what Brendan was talking about and Karen was talking about before. So the words can come. And that it's, I guess you could say there's 3 antidotes to anger. One is, rather than thinking everyone's out to get you, trying to think about how people can be useful to you and help you. A second is this idea of clambering towards the source, trying to think about how one's implicated in one's own anger, what it is that makes me angry. Can I reflect about that? And the third thing is, rather than being passive, because I don't know if you've ever noticed that angry people can be extraordinarily passive once all the bluster's gone, because the problem's out there, and if the problem's out there, the solution's out there. The idea that what another antidote to anger is that we need to recapture our sense of what we can do about the difficulty that's causing us, rather than all the people out there.
Another question up here.
The most recent example of youthful anger, I guess, is in England, the riots. Yeah. Just wondered if the panel would like to comment on what happened.
Well, there's a perfect example of people that hate their lives, you know. I lived in England for 2.5 years. I lived in Hackney, where the cars were blown up out the front of the house that I used to live in, and there was just this feeling of repression that was bubbling, and it was scary. And there was a lot of different pocket groups that little by little just formed the one group of hatred against society, and it exploded, you know, and they weren't ready to deal with it. And it was mad. But that's anger with petrol poured on it, you know. And I don't know where it comes from, but they hate everything about their lives.
Is it a class structure over there?
I think that would be. Yeah, I mean, if you said it wasn't, everything's got to do with class in the United Kingdom, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was there in the UK, especially. You know, those same groups that were setting fire to cars this year would have been 20 years ago. You know, working in jobs, working in blue-collar jobs. They might have joined a union. They might have had structures, you know, in which to, you know, resist and feel as though they had some potency rather than being totally impotent. They might have joined boxing clubs. They might have joined, you know, there might have been lots of different ways 20, 30 years ago for them to, like you say, create those situations where they're together and they have solidarity and they have a kind of way of feeling more, you know, present, like they exist, like what Brendan was saying. But I think that they're totally atomised now. They're just each one of them is like their own little bomb just ticking away, waiting to go off.
You know? They don't feel like they exist. But you know what the saddest thing was? That the only shops they didn't loot were bookshops. Talk about that on the way home.
Another question up on the side. We've got time for a couple more questions, I think.
Oh, hello. I used to teach in a school, and what used to happen in staff meetings is kind of what happens now, and that's that you always end up talking about male anger because it's so external and so visible, and so teachers always talk about the angry boys in the classroom because it's so destructive.
Yes.
I know that females can be violent and aggressive as well, but generally we are taught to turn our anger inward, so... I'm just wondering, and we also talk about the role of fathers in managing their boys, very visible, very external anger. I'm wondering what the panel thinks about the role of mothers in dealing with daughters' internalised anger, because it's just as destructive.
Well, Karen, Michael, go for it.
Picture a scene of the 8 angriest boys in school, and these are all boys who were bullies. So again, on the verge of expulsion, they'd done some very nasty things to their classmates, and it's just a check-in at the start of a group that I'm running at the school. And one of the boys starts the discussion, amazingly for a 14-year-old boy. He says, well, he talks about how his grandmother had just died, and this unleashed this really buckets of tears amongst all these boys. One boy talked about how his mother had moved to another state and didn't care about him. Another boy talked about how his mother had died when he was 9, and talked about how if anyone said anything about his mother, he would just that was a sure way for him to hit someone. And one boy in the group, this 14-year-old, summed up the discussion by saying, well, there it is, guys. It just goes to show we're all mummy's boys in the end. And perhaps there's something very important about this role of the mother. And I think these days, when we use these words, mothers and fathers, we're not necessarily referring to women and men, but we're talking about functions, a function of nurturing on the one hand, and then a function of setting a limit, showing a vision or an ideal on the other, the father side. So that these don't necessarily relate to the flesh and blood figures. And schools can be mothers, schools can be fathers, teachers can be mothers and fathers. The thing that's perhaps important in this anger, and it was really typified by this boy Daniel, he seemed to have this problem that he expected the world to respond to him exactly how it was. So if anyone did the slightest thing wrong, he would be avenging it straight away. And it was as if he was avenging his lost mother, that there wasn't anyone there to nurture him anymore, and he was going to make sure that the world was just so for him. And so I guess my formulation with someone like Daniel is that he goes around the rest of his adolescence avenging this loss of his mother at 9 because he can't quite bear it.
I was going to say about that, because we still talked about boys, that the way that girls, we mentioned earlier the way that girls, the cliche of girls internalising and boys externalising their anger, and I guess it's a stereotype for a reason. And I think, and you both, Brendan and Michael, you both mentioned the way that girls use emotional kind of tools and weapons to affect those changes that they want to see happen in their environment. But I think also something that I'm seeing all the time is girls reflecting or deflecting that anger back onto themselves, and the way that it manifests in intense self-loathing among girls, and they hate themselves, and they hate their bodies, and they hate the way they look, they hate the way they sound, they don't like their hair, they don't like the way that they, kiss. I mean, it is endless, the incredible ways in which girls will find to feel unhappy with themselves and feel anger at themselves for not being good enough. And that, to me, and I think boys do it too, but like we said, we as a society, we're very preoccupied with how boys handle their anger. And I think that girls very often grow up into women who feel a profound sense of unease in public life and in public space, and that to me comes from a kind of repressed anger and a feeling of inadequacy, and that's just such an incredible tragedy to me. And the way that I don't think that they're tragedies that should be pitted against one another, but certainly if they're both about how to verbalise and how to communicate as children and teenagers, then we have to, I guess, treat them, even though sometimes that anger and those problems with girls can seem invisible because it's not physically manifesting itself in violence. I think we have to kind of keep up the attention on both.
Karen is really saying that what some girls are good at doing is turning the anger against themselves in that form of self-loathing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I think that that the instance of body hatred and eating disorders and what the extents that girls will go to change their appearance to fit in with a particular idea of what they should look like is extraordinary. I think boys go through similar things like body anxiety and all sorts of ways of, when you're a teenager, you obviously come up with incredible ways of hating yourself for everything, but I think that girls are doing it out of a sense of invisibility and impotence and repressed anger, I think.
I wish we could continue having questions, but we are out of time. So I'd like you to thank Michael Currie, Karen Pickering and Brendan Cowell.
Thank you.